Okay, for the next stage of this operation, what are we going to need? We are going to need a piece of wax paper to keep our work surface clean. We are going to need some rocks. We're going to need our fireplace, all the pieces for that. We're going to need a gluing jig for keeping things square and straight. We're going to need some wood glue. Now I'm using LePage's Express Quick Dry wood glue, dries in 10 minutes. We're going to need a paint palette. We're going to need some small clamps and an X-Acto knife and a pencil. Paintbrush. You'll notice this is not a good paintbrush, just a paintbrush. Pair of tweezers. Glue. I'm using Fast Grab tacky glue. A sanding block comes in handy. And we need some paint. I'm using black and brown velvet. And we need a ruler or straight edge and some kind of a cloth for sopping up the moisture, and a little pot of water for washing our paintbrushes and making washes. So where do we start? Well, let's start by cutting loose the fireplace pieces from the Now these are going to have to be glued together because they do come in layers. Okay, so let's get some tacky glue here. And my glue spreader's gone missing. Okay, so we need to glue together the three pieces of the inside chimney. So we need to put some glue on the back piece. And you'll notice that one of these is skinny and one of them is not skinny. Just the skinny one goes next. Like so. Now making sure that this is where your gluing jig comes in handy, because we want to make sure that's squared up. We also want to then put this piece on. Oh, and of course it pulls apart the piece you've already put on. That's always the way it happens. So let's just ignore that. And make sure all three pieces are leveled up. Okay, so again using the square corner of the gluing jig. Let's make sure we've got our pieces all squared up. Okay, so there's our assembled fireplace. Now let's use a couple of small clamps just to keep that together while the glue dries. Okay, so that can be put on one side. So put that on one side while we get the next pieces put together. Now you'll notice I'm not bothering to sand the edges where or at least not yet, these edges here to get the tabs off. This is not a crucial step because it's going to be covered with rocks, but I might as well do that. The other piece I'm going to sand once we get it, once it's all glued together. And so here we are, cutting out the 3 pieces for the chimney top. It doesn't want to come out. Okay, there we go. Now we've got the 3 pieces of the chimney top. And we are going to glue them so that this odd-shaped piece is in between the other 2 pieces. Okay, so we'll put some more glue on here. And put the 3rd piece on. Now again, we can use our gluing jig to make sure that everything is squared up. And in fact, because this is a 90-degree corner, you can use the outside corner, if you can see what I'm doing there. Use the outside corner to make sure everything's lined up. Now again, we will sand that once the glue has dried. Put a clamp on it to hold it square while we're put it aside. Okay. Now we're going to start with this piece here, which is the outside chimney edge. And I'm going to use black paint to give it a quick painting on both sides. Now the only reason I'm doing it on both sides is to prevent any possible warping. Although the wood is at 1/8 of an inch thick, so we shouldn't have a warping problem, but just in case. let's just paint it on both sides. It doesn't take any time to do that. And paint the edges as well. It's a good thing we're working with acrylic paint here because it dries very quickly. Okay. I just remembered there's one thing I forgot to mention that you're going to need for this operation. So I'm just going to put that down and let it dry. Because the other thing that you're going to need is wipes to keep your hands clean. Now, it's not as if we were working with white silk, but it is important that at a later stage, when you're working with glue, it's nice to have things stick to the surface that you're trying to put glue onto, rather than stick to your fingers. Okay, I think that's probably dry enough at this point. Doesn't have to be too dry, but I think I'm just going to blot this a bit with the wet one so we've got the worst of the dryness off it. Okay, and we'll put the paintbrush into the water. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take our rocks. First of all, we're going to take tacky glue, and we're going to put a fairly hefty layer of glue onto the surface. Now, you've also got to do the sides, okay? Because fireplaces have rocks on the sides as well. Now, the one area that you are going to keep clear of rocks and glue are these two edges right here. These go up under the peak of the roof, okay? So, once you've got your glue on there, you can start sprinkling your rocks onto this. Now, the easiest thing to do is just to sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, tip, pausing periodically to pat, and the same with the edges. Now, we do not want any rocks interfering with the edges at the bottom. But we'll sort that out in a minute. Now, this is what I mean about the rock sticking to your fingers instead of sticking to where you want it to stick to on your glue. So we'll just take our wet wipe here. See if we can get the worst of the glue off. Now, you can see that there's a couple of areas that did not really pick up any rocks. Although, frankly, it's hard to tell sometimes because some of these rocks are white, or hardly, not white so much as kind of a light gray. Okay, let's put our next batch of glue on here. Again, making sure that we're coming up the sides. Sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, sprinkle, pat. Those are the three words you have to remember here. Sprinkle, tip, pat. Now here we go again with the glue sticking to all the wrong things. I'll put that down for a minute, just wipe my hands off. It becomes very annoying when you got glue all over everything. Now again, making sure that you do not get any glue on these two angled surfaces here. And I've got some more glue going here. Okay. Okay, sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, tip, pat a bit, sprinkle down the edge. Okay. There's our first piece of the fireplace. Now have a good look at it, because although the rocks will be uneven, you don't want it too uneven. For example, right here, you see, there's some rocks. Let me just move that so you can see it more clearly. There's some rocks sticking out right here. Come on, get into focus. So just make sure that you knock those off. Now there's two areas that you really do not want to have too much glue, too much rocks on. One is on the underneath. So I'm going to get a flat surface here, put that down, clear off my hands again. And again, make sure, tip it over. Now you see, that will interfere with a smooth fit onto your side of your cabin. So make sure you've got everything off that side. And you can now that looks okay, pretty well. You can now put that down to set. One last thing, just check and make sure that you don't have anything. One way to check for the to make sure that these edges at the corner at the top do not have any is to put them into the corner of the gluing jig like that. That will let you know that you've got a nice smooth fit and no rocks in the wrong place. In fact, I think we might just leave that just where it is to let it dry. Okay. Now then, at this point our glue should be mostly set on this piece. We're going to start on this piece. So the first thing you're going to do is a little bit of sanding here to make sure this is a nice even flat surface. Now just like the outside piece that we just finished doing, There are a couple of pieces here that we really do not want any rocks or glue on. We're going to have a mantelpiece that is going to fit on this chimney around here. Okay, so we do not want any glue on top or around the sides of that area, or I'm just going to draw a line here about 1/8 of an inch up from the just as a bit of a guide to show us where we also do not want glue or rocks. In fact, I'm not even going to paint that piece, just to remind myself that we do not want Okay, so now back to the black paint. And again, this is not rocket science. The only real reason you do this is just to make sure that there's a dark background. And that's very anal of me, isn't it? I mean, who's ever going to see the inside of that fireplace? It's either going to be covered with rocks or it's going to be covered with brick paper. And again, just to be on the safe side, we'll put some black paint on the back here. I'm just going to set that down to let it dry a bit and pick up a few rocks in the process while I paint the chimney topper. Now, the first thing you're going to paint is inside the chimney, because of course, with a fire going to keep our cabin warm, it's going to be very sooty inside there. That surface doesn't really have to be painted, but for the sake of completeness. And that surface there. Okay, so we can set that aside and let it dry. Paintbrush in the water and a wet one for the fingers. Ugh, I can still feel the glue on my hands. And I think I need a clean, wet one perhaps. So I'll just finish with that. Use it to get the worst of the rocks off the table here. Okay, let's pretend this is dry. Now we're going to do the same thing here, except we want just the edge of the inside. See how I'm just doing the thicker edge here? That's going to be covered with glue as well. Now again, see, I've kept the top surface clear. And sprinkle, pat, tip, sprinkle, pat, I see that we've just got the stones on the inside. Just make it a little more even. Okay. Now we need to apply some glue on the outside edges. Okay, and sprinkle, pat, tip. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but you see that there is an uneven edge here. We've got to get that so that it's very smooth, because that's again where the fireplace is going to attach to the wall. So we can't have any little bits of rocks sticking out, or we will not get a smooth fit. So make sure that you've got no rocks sticking out. That's equally true for this edge here, which is going to go up against the hearth. Okay, I'll set that down for a minute while I clean off my hands. Oh, what a yucky piece of... Let's start with a nice clean one. These are very important. I wouldn't want to try and do this operation without having wet ones, because, as I say, the rocks all insist on sticking to your fingers and not to the chimney. Okay, so let's have a quick look at that. Make sure that we haven't got any rocks sticking out too far, that there's nothing on the back. Okay, now, can you see that? See, there's a little bit of rock there that is overlapping the edge of the fireplace, which is where the mantelpiece is going to go, so we got to get rid of that. Okay. Okay, that looks pretty clean. But it doesn't hurt to just... There's one little rock there that is just insisting it's going to be on top of the fireplace. We don't want it to be there. Okay, now we're ready to do the big upper piece. Again, making sure that that top piece, the two edges here, stay clean. We don't want any rocks or anything on those. Oh, and look at that. My rocks are carefully rearranging themselves, so they're going to be in the way. So, I find when I do this, I'm constantly going back and forth. And okay, sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, tip, sprinkle, tip. Pat it down. Add a little bit more. Okay, let's do the edges. Oh, look at that. And in the process, I've carefully unattached all of my rocks from the front of my fireplace. Okay. Now we are going to have time at a later date to correct this a little bit. Now I'm going to get my X-Acto knife here, because this is a fairly... I want to just make sure that I don't have any I'm just moving up the rocks there to make sure that the mantelpiece is going to fit nice and smooth. Okay, now let's look at the back. Clearly we've got a few extra rocks here that we do not need. Now for precise fitting of a few rocks here and there where you need to get them, this is where tweezers come in handy. You can see I've got some areas here that are... Oh, that is a rock. Okay. And we have a couple of outliers here that are get any rocks off the bottom of that, and smooth it out as best we can. This is always going to have a very rough, uneven surface, of course, because, oops, I'm going to have to add a little dot more glue right there, because when the rocks came loose, see how I'm holding this by the tip, one finger by the tip, and with my fingernail behind, so that gives me a little bit of... Okay, pat those into place. That really does not want to have any rocks in there, does it? That's another reason why we're using black paint here, is because you can really see where you don't have any pebbles. Okay. Just one last check to make sure that the top and the back are clear, and that can be set aside to dry. Whoops, just meant one last thing here, one piece there. Although that's being a bit anal to make sure that that's stuck, because that part will probably hardly ever be seen unless you look through the front window. Of course, somebody might do that. Okay, that can be set aside with the other one to dry. And last but not least, now with the little top end fireplace here, a couple of things. First of all, you absolutely do not want any rocks in this piece here, because that is the piece that actually goes on the ridge of the cabin. So there's your fireplace. If at all possible, put very, very thin layer on the top here. It's actually personal preference. You can leave them no rocks on the top if you wish. It actually makes it a little easier to hang on to if you don't. Because there are very tight tolerances in terms of the height of the plastic case, the plexiglass case. This is a small piece, so So here's another way of doing it. There we go. Now again, clear off the inside here so we've got no rocks on the... Oh, and that didn't pick up very much rock there. Just going to set that down for a second. I want to get my hands cleaned up, more or less. Again, it's very important that this angle in here is clear. And I'm going to add just a few little rocks around the top of my chimney. Now here, when you've done that, if you do that, use the tip of your X-Acto knife to clear out the top of your chimney, because you certainly don't want a smoking fireplace. And it will smoke if it has a whole bunch of crap inside the top of it. As you can see, my glue spreader is suffering from having a little too much glue on it. Okay, let's get those rocks out of the chimney. If I can get it very clear here. Just add a little bit of glue right there, and a little bit right there. I think I'm going to use my... There we are. Okay, and there's your finished chimneys. So, there are the three pieces all finished. And all there is to do now is that thing that we are also very, very good at, waiting for the glue to dry.